All of you who were almost murdered, what's your story? Story 1. I was coming home from a bachelor's party at 2 a.m., and on the way home, I realized we all had forgotten the steak dinner portion of the evening that we had all planned. I didn't want to wake up my wife and baby, drunkenly rummaging around the kitchen, so I had the taxi drop me off at the Dunkin' Donuts a half-mile from my house. This was pre-Uber times. I got myself a couple egg and cheese bagels and started walking home. Now, I made sure to take the quieter neighborhood street rather than the busier street in order to make sure to avoid potential drunk drivers. However, about a block into the neighborhood, I see a pair of dudes coming my way down the sidewalk. I consider crossing the street, but realize how insulting that would be to the two men, clearly just walking home from a fun evening just like me. When they are a few feet away, I give them a "how you doing" nod, and they return it with their own. I was so proud of my decision to treat them like fellow bros and not be so suspicious. Then, as they walk past me, one of them pulls his hand up in the air, holding a tire iron, and strikes me in the back of the head, hard. I fall into the street from the impact but remain conscious. One holds my arms down while the other climbs on my legs and starts rifling through my pockets. I tell them to take what they want. They tell me to shut up or they will kill me. Then they ask me where my wallet is, and when I tell them which pocket it is in, they tell me to shut up or they will kill me. They took my wallet, phone, and watch, and then kicked a few more times in the head, but then took off. I was bleeding and super concussed, and without a phone at 2:30 a.m., and there was no way I could make it home on my own. I saw a house nearby where the flickering light of a TV could be seen in an upstairs bedroom. I crawled over to the house and pulled myself up onto the porch and leaned against the door and knocked and hollered for help. The homeowner was rightfully scared and didn't want to open the door at that hour for a stranger who wouldn't even stand up to be seen through his front door's viewfinder. I was feeling very faint at this point and was covered in blood from the head wound, but convinced him to call 911 and get an ambulance. I also asked if he could call my wife. At that point, he seemed to feel more confident that I was not trying to trick him, and he offered me a cordless phone through a chained door. He said he wanted to help, but I needed to stay out on the porch because he had just redone his floors, and I was bleeding way too much. When the EMTs arrived, they decide they should take me to the better hospital instead of the one a few blocks away, but the route to the other hospital required several blocks of driving on cobblestones, an experience I would not recommend to any concussed individuals strapped to a gurney in the back of an ambulance. I needed 24 staples in my head, and the doctors all told me I was lucky to have survived such a massive blow to the head with a blunt object. But the sad part, I never actually got my egg and cheese bagels. Story 2. When I was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, my family lived in a small town of about 1,200 people. It was mostly a farming town. My dad was the manager of the only bank in town. A farmer missed some payments on a loan, so the bank foreclosed and took his farm. This farmer apparently blamed my father personally, so he went to the bank with a rifle and threatened my father. My father talked to him, cops were called, and the farmer was arrested and arraigned. Bail was posted for the farmer, so he was released from jail. A few days later, my family was eating dinner, and we heard a truck pull up and park in front of our house. It was a really quiet street in a small town, so my father went to the front window to see who pulled up. It was the farmer, and this time he had a shotgun. He walked right up to the front door and knocked, and my family busted ass out of the back door and ran to a neighbor's house. Our front door was unlocked, so he could have opened it and blasted us all, but I guess he didn't think to check it. Cops were again called, and the farmer was arrested. My family spent the next week or so in a hotel a few towns away until it was assured that the farmer would be in jail without the possibility of bail. Story 3. I was a freshman in college, and in my first semester, pledged a fraternity. One night, I was assigned to work the door at a party, which was not uncommon. Around 1:32 a.m., a group of guys that worked at the dining hall, I remembered the one because he made an amazing cheese steak, showed up and each paid $5 per cup. A few minutes after they paid, the last keg kicked, and none of them got any beer. As soon as they told me that the kegs just kicked, I started counting out cash to pay them back for the cups that they bought. Before I could get them their money back, one of my drunk pledge brothers decided to physically force them out the door while yelling/shit-talking them. As soon as I could calm my buddy down, I went outside to give them their cash back, only to be met with a big surprise. When I made it down the back steps, Cheese-Steak Guy aggressively steps forward and says, "Y'all made a big fucking mistake. I'm strapped as a motherfucker," pulls a handgun out of his waistband and points it directly between my eyes. At that moment, it was remarkable that the 18-year-old me didn't shit his pants immediately. A few of the older guys in the house stepped outside and were able to talk the guy down without incident, but it felt like I had that gun pointed between my eyes for an eternity. Long story short, I was incredibly lucky that I didn't get shot that night. Needless to say, I went without cheese steaks for a few semesters after that night. Story 4. I was a clerk at an appliance repair shop. Some guy had brought his riding lawnmower in to be worked on, but decided it cost too much to have it repaired, so my boss asked me to load it up in our lift truck and drive it to his address. I was 17 and had my relatively newly minted license on me, so it felt like a big responsibility and I was happy to do it. I loaded it up just fine and drove to his address. When I started to unload it, I noticed that the battery was unattached. One of the technicians must have removed it to work on it or something. Unfortunately, I had no tools to put it back in. I checked the work order, and it said customer declined repair, needs replacement engine. So I thought, wow, he won't care because the engine is dead anyway. I rang the doorbell, and this fat drunk guy with no shirt opened the door suddenly. I had lowered the riding mower off the lift truck and had pushed it into his yard. He yells, "What the hell are you leaving that pile of junk in my yard for?" I said, "Is this not your riding lawnmower?" He says, "Hell yes, it's mine, but it's in pieces and I don't want the damn thing. What the F is wrong with you people?" So I apologized and asked him if he wanted me to load it back up. I didn't know what else to say. For some unknown reason, this pissed him off even more, and he disappeared back into his house. I went back to the truck to radio my boss. This was back in the days before cell phones, to see what she wanted me to do. In the meantime, the drunk bastard stomps out onto his porch with a shotgun, leveled it at the truck, and pulled the trigger. The windshield shattered, and I literally couldn't hear anything but ringing from the noise. I jumped to the truck, started it up, put it in reverse and floored it out of his driveway, almost going into the ditch on the other side of the road. He fires again, this time hitting the passenger side of the truck near the door, blowing shrapnel into the cab of the truck, which hit my leg and cut me a bit. I flew back to work faster than I had ever driven before, called my mom and dad, and told my boss I was never coming back to work there again. The cops came and took my statement, arrested the dumbass, and I had to testify against him a few months later, despite desperately never wanting to see him again. He only spent about 6 months in prison for it. Luckily, by the time things were settled, I had moved away to college and didn't have to worry about him anymore. Story 5. I was 13 years old. My friend and I were out skateboarding, and for some reason this one woman got really angry that we skated on the sidewalk in front of her house. She began screaming incoherently, and we just laughed it off and kept going. My friend went one way and I went another. A minute later, I am still just riding on the sidewalk to get back to my house when all of a sudden the woman yelling from before pulls up beside me in her car and starts screaming again. Full disclosure, I replied with some expletives and told her to get away. I continued riding and she just drove slowly beside me while continuing to scream. The woman eventually drove off, but then she did a U-turn and came back towards me. I expected her to just pass by and go home, but then I noticed she was actually driving directly at me. I froze and just watched her car come at me. Eventually, my brain decided I had to move. It was literally like a movie, and I dove away just as the car drove over where I was standing. I don't know her exact speed, but if I had to guess, it was 30-40 miles per hour. She just continued driving, and I sprinted home. She was later arrested and pleaded guilty to assault with a deadly weapon with intent to kill. Story 6. I posted this story before on another thread once, but here goes. When I was in high school, a random new kid started stalking me. Like following me home from school, I'd see him outside my house. He'd stand by my locker at school. He was weird. Told my counselor, but they didn't really believe me. Told a teacher I was close with, and he talked to the principal. They said they'd watch out. After about a week, my boyfriend was pissed that the school wasn't helping me. He confronted this kid and they almost physically fought. Finally, he got kicked out of school, and about a month later, less than 3 miles from my house, he strangled a girl my age, who also went to my school, and dumped her body in a field. Story 7, my ex and I got into an argument because he had become abusive, and I told him I was going to tell his family what he'd been doing. He got so angry that he tried to grab me, but I ran out of the room. He headed for the gun closet, so went outside to make sure when he killed me, the neighbors would see it. I called 911 outside, and for some lucky reason, they were just blocks away. When they got there, he was in the middle of loading the Remy 700. I pressed charges, and he only got 1 night in jail. His dad bailed him out, and despite me getting a 5-year restraining order, I'd run into him around town. He pleaded no contest and got 3 years probation. That's it. I moved 3,000 miles away, but still fear him. Story 8. When I was 19, I dated a girl whose dad was a psycho. Was probably just over 5 feet tall, but all muscle. Did a bunch of time in prison for drugs and violent crimes. Once a guy cut him off in traffic, followed the guy and finally boxed him in, tore open his car door, and held a knife to the guy's crotch, threatening to cut his dick off until the guy wet himself. This level of crazy didn't find most of this out until after the fact. She and I lived together in an apartment. I worked afternoons, she worked days. There was a couple hours in the afternoon when no one was there, had a day off one day, and was running some errands. Came home in that time frame when no one was normally home, and her father came walking out of our bedroom. I asked him what he was doing there, and he told me because he liked me he would be honest. He said he was there to rob us. He was on drugs and was in the middle of a crime spree. Held up a bunch of people in the complex who were entering or leaving the building, then came through our bedroom window. He said he looked around and didn't find anything, so he was on his way out. He said he wouldn't hurt me, but if I ever told anyone this happened, including his daughter, I would disappear and no one would ever find me, and he walked out. The whole time he was talking to me, all I could think of was don't give him a reason to attack me. That and I had a coffee cup in the living room with almost $1,000 in it. Thankfully, he didn't find that. I thankfully never saw him again. My relationship was on the rocks, and this gave me the needed push to get out of there. I never told anyone what happened until after he died. Just thought of another situation where he could have killed me, and also demonstrates how crazy he was. He went away on a hunting trip, and while he was gone, I came over one day after she got home from school. She was a senior in high school at the time. Her mom was at work, and we just sat around on the couch for a couple hours. No exaggeration, 3 hours after we got home, he came walking out of the front coat closet. He tells us he wanted to see what we would do if we thought he was out of town, so we got home early and waited in the closet for a few hours, peeping on us to see what we would do. Once we felt nothing was going to happen, he came out. I can't imagine what he would have done if we started fooling around. Story 9. So I was backpacking in South America and was getting a bus between cities in Brazil. As you may know, night buses are routinely robbed, and I was unlucky enough to be on a bus at this time. Being the only foreign person on the bus, they obviously rinsed me dry. Passport, cash, phone all gone. I was then locked in the luggage compartment till they had left the scene, all while having a gun pointed at me. Now that sucked. What sucked even more was a week later when I was getting another bus and it was robbed again. Again, they went straight to the only foreign person on the bus who didn't speak Portuguese and demanded all the stuff the previous robbers stole off me. I was pretty much crying with a gun in my face as I had nothing to give them. They took me outside the bus, and I thought for sure I was going to be killed, but again they locked me in the luggage compartment while they robbed everyone else. I booked flights from then onwards, even though I got mugged twice. Brazil is still the best country I have ever visited. All this happened in 2011, and I made friends for life during the 8 months I was in South America. Some tourists, but a lot of Brazilians. I wouldn't let my experiences put you off. Just stay safe and don't be a dumbass like me. I totally recommend going to visit, even if you just stay in the touristy areas. I was young and foolish when I was there. I went to the favelas outside of organized tours and took too many drugs and drank too much. I didn't think I was invincible. I just didn't care as long as I wasn't killed. I was probably lucky I only got mugged twice. I did also get dengue fever in the rainforest, and got the equivalent of trench foot by sleeping in wet boots for too long while in the Amazon. Nonetheless, definitely go spend a week in Rio.